from the Reading League Louisiana, and we are so happy to join you guys this morning, bright and early, 8 o'clock Central Time in Louisiana, but we certainly can't beat that 6 o'clock time. Bless you for being here. So in addition to us leading the Louisiana Reading League chapter, we also work for the Center for Development and Learning in our programs department. I'm the VP of Program Development, and the Center for Development and Learning is literacy nonprofit organization. And so I'm going to keep introductions short because we have a lot to get to. I'm excited. And I'll allow Elena to introduce herself, but just to let you know sort of how we are going to sort of manage today is going to be open conversation, free flow. We send out some like guided questions. So if those don't interest you, be certain to ask your own questions and or have your own discussions, because what this is not is a presentation. It is definitely a discussion. Let's talk about some things from the NRP study and then the new journal article. So I will let Elena introduce herself.
Okay, can you guys hear me? You're good, okay. So like Dejanay said, we're in Louisiana, so bear with me. I have my iPhone on and my computer on because I live on 4 acres and a pecan plantation surrounded me, and it's hit and miss. So it's beautiful, but I cannot watch Netflix all the time or catch up on things. So Dejanay will help make sure I'm not cutting out or losing you guys. So I am the VP of the Reading League Louisiana chapter and the literacy specialist at the Center for Development and Learning. Super excited. Prior to my year, I just made my year anniversary as literacy specialist at the center. I was a district staff member at Rapides Parish in Central Louisiana as their ELA curriculum specialist. And then prior to that, I take from Pam Kastner because she said this, I had the honor of teaching first graders in Louisiana, and I had the honor of teaching first and second graders in Brooklyn, New York. So I don't know, is it the Science of Reading princess, or I'm really not a princess, or like the ugly duckling to the swan, where I was trained at Teachers College, Columbia University, and made the complete shift, and that's all I knew. So really passionate about getting the message forward, paying it forward, and really supporting teachers and no shaming. You know, we need to learn and just do better. That's going to help more kids. So super excited. Dejanay is going to be starting with that first part, and glad to see everyone on here. Appreciate you guys getting up early. My middle child woke me up at 5. You know, part of it was like, thanks, but now I'm tired.
Thanks, Elena. So we're going to do, so as you know, we are talking about chapter 4. We have part 1, which is vocabulary, and then part 2 is text comprehension. And of course, it's all the comprehension chapter. But before I jump into that, I did put the link for the post-event survey. So part of our chapter launch is that we are grant funded. And as you know, if any of you work with grants, we have to do some outputs and outcomes. So we would love it if you can help us with our grant reports so we can continue to do this work. So please, please, please fill out that, that post-event survey. Also, we did sort of push this event out to our Louisiana people. So I did see someone say hi from New Orleans. Good morning. Hey, there you go, Susan. And so if you guys don't already follow the Reading League Louisiana, please do so, because we're going to be launching our membership pretty soon, and we want to ensure that you are included in that. And yeah, just give us a little shout out in the chat. Okay, so without further ado, with all those logistics put aside, let's talk vocabulary. So, okay, let's start with my favorite part, because I'm huge on vocabulary. So I posted for your guided questions, the one that said the chicken or the egg. I don't know if I made sense. Sometimes I talk, it makes sense to me, but I'm not sure if that made sense to anyone else. So here's where that came from. Let me give you a little background. if any of you work with kids with any additional needs, of course, in addition to, I mean, I shortened that intro, but in addition to the Reading League and Center for Development and Learning, I also am a state leader for Decoding Dyslexia, have a child with dyslexia. So I'm very, reading disability focused. So that's where that sort of came from. And the argument that read aloud, right, is always an issue, giving kids the accommodation of read aloud. And having schools argue that you can't have read aloud because it's listening comprehension instead of reading comprehension. So that's sort of where that came from. So I'd love to know if anyone had any thoughts behind that chicken or egg, oral vocabulary versus print vocabulary, which is, which develops the other.
I'll chime in. I would have to, it really, I'm an early childhood person at heart. I'm Susan Connick from New Orleans. Early childhood comes first. And if you don't have that language background when these kids are in the fundamental years, I just think it's essential. It was a very interesting question. And when I taught 4-year-olds for 8 years, parents would ask me, how can I get my kids ready to read? How can I get my kids ready to read? I would say, talk to them, have rich dialogue. It's critical.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, it is. I mean, that's where it starts. When we talk about language acquisition, because for me, that was my biggest takeaway from this article, is that we're talking about vocabulary, but as the Reading League updated journal article with Kate Kane mentioned about, that acquisition of vocabulary, it really starts with its language. Vocabulary is language. So it's language acquisition. And there are stages of language acquisition. It's the ladder of acquisition, and it starts with oral receptive language before it's oral expressive or written expressive. So it definitely starts with that oral component, and that's, for me, the part of this, because the article talks about vocabulary being oral and print. It only mentions it once, but the fact that if you have that depth, which is mentioned in Kane's article, that depth of vocabulary, then it's going to help with that comprehension piece, because you're going to recognize those words in print. So it definitely starts at the oral language. Any other thoughts on that one?
I see that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I said I was, so I teach middle school, young middle school, 5th grade in Massachusetts. And I've dealt with a lot of, I think where middle school starts getting into, the classes are content-based, so you're going by a schedule. I've always felt like it needs to be, when we're looking at, say, like IEPs and determining reading, you need to look at the goal of what you're trying to get. If you're trying to have them comprehend concepts, but their reading is definitely below, then I definitely think listening comprehension and allowing the read alouds is important, because if your goal is for them to understand the concepts as opposed to worrying about getting through the reading, then definitely the listening component. But then we fight the battle. Right now I'm a reading skills teacher, but I was a special ed liaison for many, many years and fought the good fight for many years. That, then we'd have some kid, well, why can't they just have everything read to them? And it's like, well, we have to look at each individual goal, what the goal is. If you're in reading class, then obviously, or you're taking the reading assessment, then obviously you're not going to have it read aloud to them, because the goal is reading and building that reading vocabulary. So I think we need to get away from the one size fits all, how we teach vocabulary, one size fits all. And I think we need to look at what is the goal. I mean, if you're a history teacher, you have a student, you're a special ed liaison, for example, and you have a student in history, and the goal is for them to understand, I don't know, the fall of Rome, then listening there is obviously okay. But if you are teaching your kids reading class and they're having a quiz on vocabulary, and you want them to be able to use it in their writing, then they have to be able to read the vocabulary. That's where I think people get confused, is there's no one size fits all for each student, but there's also not one size fits all for every activity. And you have to take a step back and look at the main, do the means justify the end, or does the end justify the means? What, and kind of work backwards. What do you want the kids to know, and how are you going to get about doing it? So with vocabulary, you can teach them the oral vocabulary and have them listen to it so that it gets in there, so that when they see it on paper, it's kind of already there. When I talk to the kids, I say to them that their brains are kind of like file cabinets, and that, so when I teach a lesson, I'll be like, okay, well, I'm putting this in the file folder. You can put it in the back of your brain for now, but my goal is, if you see this word, that file will automatically pop up. So it's building that file cabinet in your brain so that it eventually, now for me, as I get older, those files get stuck a lot of times. The word will be there and I'll be like, come on, drawer, open, but at least it's there. So that's the battle I see fight. Us as middle school, and especially in middle school special ed with kids with reading issues, that's the battle we tend to fight is, it's not one size fits all, and it's not one class fits all. We have to look at what's appropriate for each class, for each student. So
do you, Sarah, or just really for anybody, do you notice when you're working with educators, or you're a classroom educator yourself, I'm thinking about my experience from when I first started to even being at the district level, when we meet with PLCs or your cluster meetings or whatever they're called, when you're planning together and working with your grade levels, vertical alignment, I don't ever recall spending time on choosing which vocabulary words that we're going to have to explicitly teach, which words are going to be like those drop-in words, and then also thinking about the protocol on how are we even teaching it. I know we first need to make sure they can even, have correct pronunciation of it. Can they read the multisyllabic word? And then having, teachers talk about, well, which words are the most important? Because if not, it gets very bombarding and very overwhelming. And which words can we throw in throughout the week in lessons, or as we're walking down the hallway or something, where they could be the drop-in words. So have you guys noticed any planning or have experience with planning around vocabulary?
Well, I can comment on that again. I'm kind of fortunate in that I'm teaching a reading skills class, which is a supplemental course for the fifth graders. We call
Sarah, you went mute. Oh, maybe she can't hear us.
You went muted.
That is a little off. Am I freezing? Yeah, sorry. Okay. So when I teach vocabulary, I've been teaching it two ways. I've been working with the ELA teachers. They're teaching because of Mr. Interrupt. So I've been pulling words from there. But then on Wednesdays, because we're hybrid, Wednesdays are all remote and the kids have a half day. So I've been teaching what's called Wednesday words. So I teach a new Greek and Latin root, and I introduce them to Greek and Latin roots at the same time. So I'm kind of coming at it from both sides. Because I think both of those things are important. They need to see the words in context, but they also need to be able to have a background of like roots, prefixes, suffixes to work on their word building and word creating and understanding experiences.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually what the article mentions too, sort of those methods of teaching vocabulary, teaching them explicitly, teaching them directly, in isolation and in context. One thing that we do, I was trained through NIHOUSE, I'm a dyslexia therapist, is we really spend a lot of time on vocabulary, on getting that knowledge building, that depth of knowledge, but the introducing that vocabulary prior to putting it in context, in the story or in that book, putting it into that context, introducing those vocabulary words first. We may use a semantics web, right? Introducing that word and talking about the meaning, because it's about vocabulary's meaning, word meaning. And you talked, Sarah, about the morphology part of it, like breaking that apart, deciding, of course, that's later years, but you can definitely do that in earlier grades. Now, what the article did say is that there was sort of a gap in the NRP's research, right? There's not any of that early language or early vocabulary. They really saw that the information that they found in research was from 3rd to 8th grade and not the earlier grade. So I think there's definitely some, because we focus a lot right now on earlier grades and having that be introduced in, at the kindergarten pre-K level of developing that language. What I found interesting was that they had more than 20,000 research citations on vocabulary. So when they were doing this, digging into what the research said, so there were 20,000 citations that they found on vocabulary, but they only identified 50. They narrowed it down. I don't know who spent all this time sifting through all of those articles from 20,000, narrowing it down to 50. And that was from studies between 1979 and 2000 that met their specified, criteria to say, these are the ones that we're going to look at that have all these components of this research that we're looking for. But of those 50, there were 21 different methods that they found to teach vocabulary. So yeah, it's you're not going to just use one. There's going to be a combination, and they even said they hadn't found what that combination is. What's the perfect way to teach vocabulary. So I thought that was very interesting in the research, and that there's still more research to be done in terms of the best method. But like Sarah said, you really have to see what, allow your students to drive that decision. It's whatever the students need. Any other observations from vocabulary? Any interesting facts?
The only other thing that I'll share is interesting. When you mentioned read aloud tests, I was previously teaching in a private school here in Metairie, and I started a reading lab about 6 years ago. And it's interesting to have tracked kids as they got through middle school, and some of them just needed that read aloud support. And in our little small setting, we could do that. But when kids were applying to our private high schools, and I was reaching out to their support staff, their IAP coordinators, whoever it might have been, they won't do read aloud tests in our private high schools. It's just not an option. I even tried to come up with, here's a Word document. Can you make the test a Word document and press the button so they can have an oral assent? And it's just not considered. And it's a real shame. I even offered the pen where kids could do their own scanning, and so we have a lot of work to do on getting that support. So just as a segue to what you started with, it really is, it's a shame. It really is a shame.
I wanted to add that I actually am elementary special ed, and I have started my second graders. I've only been in special ed for a few years, but my second graders, I've started giving them read aloud accommodations, because if you're a struggling reader, how is it fair for you to not show what you know? Because my kids, okay, we call it listening comprehension, and I've had gen ed teachers say, well, that's listening comprehension. Okay, but that's what they know. And they know they have a lot of background knowledge. They like to listen to stories. They understand. Just because they are still decoding CVC words, I look at it as, why are they being penalized when they're doing a vocabulary test, a comprehension test? Why are we penalizing them? Because they're still learning how to decode, when in fact they've listened to the story multiple times during the week with the class. And I think it's only fair for them to be able to share that they do know. So I actually don't get pushback with my IEPs from that, but I know that some of my peers do.
Christine, piggybacking off of that. Oh,
no, go ahead, Elaine. I was just saying it's about access.
Right. And piggybacking off Christine, I have so many teachers constantly what, kids are bombing tests. And it got down to it where I was like, they're like, but we know they know it because the rich conversations they're having in class. And it was almost like they needed permission to say, look, what is your purpose of this grade, this assessment, this observation? And if it's reading and decoding words, then do that. But if you're looking at content knowledge and you need to know, do they know about the fall of Rome? Then maybe there's like a 2-part grade. So it was a lot of, she was retired now, our former assistant superintendent in Rapides Parish, Miss Kim Bennett, was really open to all grade levels, but letting teachers have that permission of taking a grade for that, but maybe their reading grade isn't high because they're struggling and they're years behind, and that's okay, but we need to show what it is so they get the right support. But just giving teachers that permission to, what is the focus? What is that end result of your common formative assessment or your formative assessment, and grade it accordingly on what information you're trying to find out. And a lot of times, if reading is the barrier, is it reading that's making them have an F, or is it their content knowledge that they're failing?
And
here's the challenge with that. I'm also the 504 coordinator, and what I'm finding out is that in order to get those accommodations technically turned on for kids, they have to go through a process. They have to be identified. And if they're not identified on a screener, then they don't get that accommodation, which is unfortunate. So we have this cycle of kids that are struggling but haven't been identified. It's tough.
Yeah. In my past job as a special ed liaison and reading teacher, I actually faced the opposite happen. I distinctly remember this. It was many years ago, but it's stuck in my brain. I had a student extremely dyslexic, like would read a passage, get every other word wrong, but still was able to answer every comprehension question correctly, had the skills. So the battle we were fighting was trying to get this kid reading services, but everybody kept saying, but he's getting A's in all of his classes. Why? And so the battle was, but we are accommodating him. Things are being read to him. The mother and I were fighting. She finally was like, yes, he's getting A's in his classes and you guys are doing a great job reading to him and he's getting the concepts. And this was an 8th grader, but he's still calling me when I'm at work because he doesn't know how to read the back of a TV dinner to know how long to put it in the microwave for. So because he was so I feel like that's where, as a reading league and there's so much clarity that needs to be made on the different aspects of reading. And this might be, kind of segue, this might be more of a comprehension discussion. So I know we're going to segue into that. But when you were talking about trying to get services, all I kept thinking about was I've had to have that battle in reverse where, they're doing fine in their classes. They're getting A's in science and social studies. Well, yeah, because we're doing a great job accommodating them, but they're still going to need to be able to read when they leave the confines of this building. So, it unfortunately is reflected on both sides.
So Pam, I'm going to address your part about owning language. So when we talk about teaching vocabulary explicitly, we can't do that without talking about the assumptions and the bias that come with vocabulary instruction, or that can come with vocabulary instruction. So what we do sometimes as educators is just assume kids know what we're talking about, or assume that they, we make the decisions on which ones, to Elena's part, which words we want to teach explicitly, which words we want to, vocabulary words we want to pull out. And sometimes it's not just about those big words, those multisyllabic words. It's about the little words. It's about the fact that taking that cultural context, taking that, I'm sorry, I got this throat scratching thing, taking the child's background knowledge and awareness of, and I'm talking on the oral language, that vocabulary, the oral vocabulary. If you are reading something or there's some text and the word, I don't know, avocado is in there, you may bypass avocado. You eat avocado toast, you order your burgers with avocado. Avocado lives in your world. But to a different kid, avocado is as foreign as Greek and Latin language. So to be able to make that decision as a teacher to say, I'm going to bypass this word because we all know it, and jump to that, you know, really in your mind, the word that needs more attention, you've now lost that child in the word avocado. They can't own that word, right? Because it doesn't live in their world. They never used an avocado. They haven't seen an avocado. So it's about making that connection, having to teach vocabulary, connecting it to their, you know, lived experience, their own knowledge. And if they don't have it, we have to build it. It's our job to build that vocabulary, build that awareness by bringing in, I mean, if you've ever taught pre-K, which I have, only a year, not my ministry. If you've ever taught pre-K, it's all about connections. It's all about bringing in things to teach them that unit. So if you are teaching camping, you might bring in a tent. You may bring in, you know, a pot. You may bring in a fake little fireplace. But we lose that level of instruction. We lose that level of connectivity because we assume that kids have it already, and we don't teach it explicitly. So I cannot, so thanks Pam for bringing that up, because it is important that we allow our students, our kids to own that language, and they can if there's no connection to it. So.
I'm Lindsay Sizemore from Oklahoma. I've been kind of looking at this too as well through English language learners, and the fact that we lose a lot of that content, and this goes to the assessment and the owning of the vocabulary words. We assume that the student speaking about things means that they have that knowledge. They can talk about it. They should be able to write about it, read about it, use that knowledge, use that vocabulary. And many times they can't. And if they can talk about it and we put a passage in front of them, those little words escape them so much that the content and the connections kind of are just gone. And I think it's a really fine balance, especially for me. This is my 13th year teaching. I'm a reading specialist. I'm special ed certified. I'm working on, you know, other things in reading. And I can't imagine being a new incoming teacher and not being at least presented with all these nuances of reading within the kid's background and how vital background and vocabulary is together. Just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Lindsay. Absolutely. We lose those little things because the meaning gets lost, right, in the bigger picture. Okay, so of course, vocabulary leads to comprehension. But again, going back to the article, because I have to remember why we're here, right? It's because of the report. So I'm always sort of bring it back. The interesting thing in the NRP was that, and I was very saddened by this part. So I'd love some quick conversation around but that it said that studies suggest that vocabulary instruction that they found did not lead to gains in comprehension. So that sort of, report, and I think the executive summary talked about how there needs to be more research behind that, and that it was very interesting. And of course, this was from 2000. I know we've had some additional research since then, but any thoughts around that? I can definitely say that I'm not as smart as these people who did this, but I would argue that it definitely leads to comprehension.
You know, my first thought on that is, and thank you for bringing that up. My first thought on that is, you know, all the years I was in education and administrators expected this quick fix. So, you know, an intervention with letter sound decoding, you know, like a Wilson phonics or something, that might give you a quick fix, maybe a year-long fix with as far as intervention. But, you know, vocabulary is a lifelong acquisition. And some kids who are so far behind have a long way to catch up. And that's a marathon. That's not a sprint. So I can't quote how long these studies were, but my sense is that they did make gains in comprehend or in vocabulary and comprehension that maintained over time, maybe in a longitudinal study would have been evident, but there probably just wasn't enough time to show gains, in overall comprehension as opposed to just one specific vocabulary or comprehension intervention. Does that make sense?
And
Mhm.
Julie, what I took away from that as well, Dijon, it was interesting when reading the first part of the report, it was like, okay, we tried we really can't find anything in vocabulary. And I think a big part of it with these studies, because that's when I started diving into science of reading and understanding the research, it's easy to find, oh, the kid struggles with phoneme segmentation. Let's go find something that targets that skill, or letter sounds. Those early, very single lane skills, I think, are easier to find the research. I add this and we see if we have success. Something like vocabulary and comprehension, it's so hard to isolate. Was it just vocabulary building skills? Was it just comprehension direct strategies? I think that attributes to the article saying that they really couldn't find the research, because how do you just take a bunch of kids and isolate, is vocabulary direct instruction, is this going to work? Or is this going to work? You're not going to take 100 kids and track them for 5 years and only give them vocabulary instruction, right? So that's what I found very interesting. And the biggest challenge, especially working with older kids, I can target oral reading fluency, right? I can knock that out the park. But to really pinpoint and target an intervention with progress monitoring that targets vocabulary, that's tough.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one that sort of dug that in and found that little nugget. But we all know with teaching kids that it builds that, it just builds that understanding. And like Julie said, it's a matter of, understanding the language and the content of what that, that meaning of the word. So vocabulary leads to comprehension. And so that's a perfect segue into the text comprehension part with Elena.
Yay.
So let's talk about that for a minute. Elena, what you got? What you found?
Okay. So I'm very much the person that wears the in the field hat. Bringing it to try to take the reports and the information and then go, okay, how have I seen this when I've been in the classroom or when I've worked with teachers? So I'm going to set you up with a scenario of a classroom and you let me know. I would be the first one to say, I've definitely done this. But if you've seen it, and then we'll kind of chat about it. So does this sound familiar? Students are learning about comprehension skill. Let's say it's inferencing. The teacher has, she's made her anchor chart. It's adorable. And she has demonstrated, I do, we do. And now students are about to go head onto the you do. Their task, their activity is that they're going to be reading various scenarios on your blue note cards. Maybe they're with a partner in a group, and they're going to determine what the inference is, and they're going to match it with, say, the blue note card with the yellow note card and match their inference. So none of those lessons are it's not based on a content knowledge. It's just, I call it the cookie cutter lesson, that I've taught you inferencing is this, we've practiced, and now you're going to go match the inferencing. So here's my question. Do you feel that from the National Reading Report educators and curriculum companies took those findings verbatim, throwing them into a curriculum? And how many of you have noticed the same thing? And have you been successful at changing that mindset of educators of that you really have to look at the upper portion of Scarsborough's reading rope and dig into that content and not so much the cookie cutter lesson? So have any of you experienced that with your teachers? It's in your basal, any of your curriculums, that it's just very verbatim of today you're learning about main idea. Next week you're learning about inferencing. Next week you're learning about story elements. And then it just kind of continues on from there. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about that.
So in my district, we do standards-based report cards, and I found that that drives a lot of discussion, sometimes too much, because we've kind of been taught this whole PLC model that you look at the standard, you look at what they're lacking, and then you intervene on it. And it's not really that linear, as you've said, and I've done it myself, and I've seen other teachers say, okay, like the standard is inferencing, the standard is main idea. They got that wrong on the assessment. Let's do an intervention, quote, on that. And then you try and you come up with all these things, and you only get so far. But I think that a lot of times report cards are a big driver of some of these practices.
I think it's also time. The minutes that teachers have to fill in what they have to fill in, that's in that tier 1 curriculum, and they feel so married to that tier 1 curriculum. At my previous school, I did a lot more interventions. I'm blended between interventions, teaching, 504, you name it. But when I worked with students and they would come to me and the teachers would say, it's a comprehension problem. Let's look at their universal screeners. They don't know what they're reading. When we're really getting down to it, I used to have bookmarks with the kid, and it just was a stop sign, and it said, stop, does what I'm reading make sense? Does what I'm reading make sense? And can we have a dialogue about it, right? Because if it's not a compare and contrast, if it's not a sequencing, if teachers are so honed into those specific tier 1 curriculum driven skills, a lot of times kids just can't stop back and say, can we talk about the text? Can we just have a discussion?
That's also, though, driven by administration, because I worked in a very large district where mandates came down every year. It was a different one, and this year we're going to do this thing, and you're not giving. I feel like it's just draining any joy that kids have out of stories in that area. I mean, I'm all about science of reading. I mean, that's where I live now. But as a gen ed teacher, that's what admin expects you to do. And every week during professional development, they tell you the next thing to do. And so then there you are, because when they come to observe you, that's what they expect to see. They like those little blue and yellow note cards. They think those are fabulous, and you surely must be teaching your students exactly what they need, so you can put it, as Jessica said, so you can then put it on their report card.
To me, this just speaks to a lack of awareness. It's so unfortunate. I mean, this is pervasive in our district. Our entire curriculum is made up of this like strategy things, and they look at outcome assessments and, oh, the child missed these questions that were main idea questions or inferencing questions. So what they surely must need is intervention in main idea. And it's just a lack of awareness, and it's going to take time. Like, we've got to turn the ship. It's a paradigm shift. And what we have in our division we're finding is silos. You have curriculum on one side, you have leadership on the other, and leadership is not informed about these things. We've got to have a bridge between those two entities, right? So we can get on the same page and start changing. It's teacher knowledge and teacher capacity. They do what they're asked. Like, they don't know better or differently, so they do what's provided to them, what they've always done, what they always experienced. And administrators the same. They don't know any different. I mean, they're just trying to do what they perceive is the right thing and push the right thing, and the kids pay the price.
I think also the tier 1 curriculum is most of the time, it's nice and procedural, right? You teach this, you do small groups on this, you do tests on this, you move on to the next thing. And from a teacher standpoint, when I have so much to get done, Christine, to satisfy my administrators, guess what? I'm gonna follow the procedure. I'm just gonna go through the motions. And I think, Reading League does a great job of really helping us put some of these things, the report, it's like I almost envision that report. I'm like, okay, could that report, because I do this for myself. I have a 1-pager of like my comprehension skills, my little cheat notes. And whenever I get a group of especially older kids, monitoring comprehension's huge. That's a big one that I use with kids a lot. And I pull articles from ReadWorks that they're interested in, right? I let them kind of vote, and we read and we talk about text, and we break it apart from let's have a discussion about this. I'm not worried if it's cause and effect. I'm not worried if it's sequencing. Granted, valuable strategies, but until we take the time to sit back and just talk to children about reading and drawing meaning from text, we're not going to make any progress.
I think it's also, it's kind of it's another like chicken and egg type thing where, you know, instead of that cookie cutter lesson, it's just give them the vocabulary and the content, and they will discover that skill through conversation. I did an activity with administrators and teachers. It was very eye-opening. I took a short, you know, a few paragraph passage about a shark attack in New Jersey, you know, from one of like the real stories. And I put it on 10 cards. So everyone had 10 cards, but every so often I stopped and did a cookie cutter lesson. That was, you know, main idea is da, 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 da. And then they would continue the story and read like the next part. And then they would continue their little card and read. And then I'd stop again and say inference. An inference is blah, 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 blah. And we got through it all. And I said, okay, so what just happened as you're experiencing as the student, we're getting into the story, and then you cut me off and you give me a cookie cutter lesson. And then you continue, and then you cut me off and you gave me an inference cookie cutter lesson. And as we got through it, we could, and you know, the question came up, would our students be able to inference something about this passage? And everyone unanimously was like, well, yeah, but we keep stopping them to do these lessons. So instead of, and knowing that they're extremely important and they're in the National Reading Panel, but just over the years of learning and digging more into science of reading is understanding that I think through vocabulary and deepening background knowledge, sentence level structure, that we can give students that information and they will discover main idea. So when you ask those questions or ask, well, why did this person do this? And what would be the purpose of that? They can explain it. They can write about it. But we never stopped and said, you know, today we're learning about main idea, and I'm going to, you know, have my anchor chart, you know. So I think it's just really interesting, and it's made me just think a lot about Basil's, you know, curriculums that we've had in Louisiana. You know, there were some in New York when I taught there, of just there, we need them. We need those instructional strategies that are high ranking and have the most effect. But I think we have to make sure now, looking at it, is that it's not, you know, I'm trying to remember who, Christine said, you know, appeasing the administrators that might not know, but making sure that we're doing the best for our kiddos. And sometimes it's having those little ideas to do with your staff and a PLC or with administrators to make them go, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that isn't the best. But maybe in the morning work when they first come in, I will put out the inference cards and have them work on these tasks with group work while they're working on oral, you know, language and vocabulary. But it's not going to be the sole source of do they really understand it? I need them to connect it with content in their text. So anyone else have a feedback on that?
It's empowering with the knowledge to make the decisions. I'll share with you in my tier 1 curriculum, they've got something called Readles, where when we're working through decodable text, they've got the little picture of the word and the word. So the first thing I do with the kids is we take those words and we look at them and find the phonics clues so that I'm empowering them to use the code and not look at the picture. So it's just those little snippets of, yeah, this is my Basil. Yeah, this is tier 1. Is there something that's not quite aligning with best practices? And if so, how can I make a slight shift?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know just from experience in Louisiana, we have Louisiana guidebooks, and it's used to both 3rd grade through 12th grade. And after attending their content leader training to really understand how they set it up, it does do that. It gives them so much background knowledge and leads up that they can really discover what that big goal is of those 3-day lessons or that week lesson or that ultimate goal of the whole unit, which is really nice. So we know, okay, with moving into part 2, text comprehension, the simple view of reading, you know, the product of word recognition and language comprehension. And I really loved, it was on the National Reading Panel, page 4-39, where it stated, comprehension is the essence of reading. It's like, oh, that sounds, you know, like a fragrance. I'm going to spray some essence of reading on today. So had a few big ideas, and I wanted to hone in someone's going to make an essence of comprehension perfume. We're going to come together. We're going to make this. And it's going to smell like one of those old machines. What is like the dye thing machines, like printer ones? I actually never used it, but that's what people, the purple, they would always talk about the purple hands. So a few big ideas, just the collaboration with this group. And Susan kind of mentioned on this. So do readers know when they are not understanding the text? Truly not understanding the text, not just that overview. And I'm thinking, of course, my mind always goes to first grade because that's what I taught the most of, but we have a range in here. And in your experience, how have you supported teachers and students when they're not understanding? And it's not just, and I don't want to say it this way, where it's not just, the sentence of the cat ran up the tree and the child is saying, well, no, well, the cat ran around the tree. I'm not talking so simple, but as it gets heavier with read alouds or with passages for older students where there's starts adding in a lot of pronouns and the pronouns start getting very tricky. So what have been techniques that you guys have used with strategies? Because we know that we need them to kind of self-regulate and know that they're not understanding something, that they need a self-question. So what have you guys used to make sure they're really stopping and making them self-aware if they truly understand what it is? And if they're using pronouns, who is they, what is it, and where is it connecting in passages?
I've done work starting at just the sentence level and looking and helping kids unwind sentence levels from grade level text and just working through a sentence. And I usually start with trying to find a simple sentence and compound and complex. And then when they can do one sentence and we know, they don't need in my state to know subject and predicate, but when they know who is doing what and what descriptives are around here, what gives us more information. And then I do two sentences and how are they connected? And that's where you get your pronoun reference, or if you have connective like because, but, so, also, like, and that's where you get into helping them understand, and they have to read and make that mental model. But then when they get new information, they have to shift that mental model. So that's how I've started.
A tangible tip, when I was in my lab and working with small groups, I would have small groups and some kids would be on Lexia, an online differentiated program, to do some independent practice. And a simple thing is I would keep a red and a green cup. And if kids had a green cup on, I knew that they were chugging and doing just fine. We talked about when to put the red cup up, and that way they didn't have to sit there and wave their hands. They had enough things they could do while waiting for me to finish with small groups and going to them. But that red cup was very empowering for them to be aware of when they were lost. I would tell my kids, please don't just hang out in clueless land. Let's ask some questions and find some answers.
So I'm going to approach this from a behavioral standpoint. In my former life, I was a counselor. So when we talk about like dealing with older students and understanding how older students behave in an educational setting, little kids, and I use this with all love, they're sometimes so much easier to teach because they're sponges. They absorb all this information and they ask an infinite amount of questions when you're like, all right, let's keep it moving. So they ask all of these questions. The older students, especially when they have those gaps and that awareness isn't there and they are struggling with what don't I know and what do I know? And you may say, does anyone have any questions? And of course they don't have any questions because you don't know what you don't know and you think you have it as a middle schooler. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna just keep moving, especially when none of my peers around me are raising their hands. So I don't want to be, so that's that behavioral component. And so I think we have to be intentional in that at school level and up, especially when understanding that we have to pull that out of them to show them what it is and to model for them what it means to query about these components of instruction and to model for them how appropriate question asking is and pulling that out to say, well, I had a question about who are they talking about? Who is it? And then they can respond in that way. And like you said, you're teaching indirectly, you're not labeling it and say, well, guess what? I just taught you X, Y, and Z. it's about that conversation. But in the NRP, it actually talked about that, because I told my 6-year-old, like, you're in this book. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, so analytic conversation, like when I'm reading a story aloud to him, and bless his heart, I can never get through a story because he has all the questions. If he comes across a word that I'm reading to him and he'll go, well, what's that? And then I'll explain what that is. We'll talk about that vocabulary. He's like, oh, so does that mean it's like when that time where I was riding my bike and then this happened and then I scraped my knee and then you put a Band-Aid on it. And so he's connecting that vocabulary with a one question, and it's sort of snowballed. The analytic conversation, peeling back those layers. We don't do that as much, the older they get, because they're not initiating those questions. We have to pull that out. And so that's my counseling segment for the day. We have to be intentional with our middle schoolers, for sure.
Look, and I want to go to the chat. Lindsay has a great question, and a lot of people are responding to it. So let's just throw this one out there. Is there an awareness thought toward developmental language disorders in some of the older students who continue to not be able to comprehend despite adequate word level reading? So if you just scroll up on the chat, you'll see it again. Is there an awareness or thought toward developmental language disorders in some older students who continue to not be able to comprehend despite adequate word level reading?
Well, then here comes the question. That is a fantastic question. And what I find is when I worked with older students, have they been afforded the time? Have they been afforded the time to work in small groups, or even smaller than that, to truly take apart a piece of text and talk about it and see if they are capable of having a realistic discussion about the text, right? Because my fear is that they're in tier 1, and teacher and grades, I'll say comprehension problems. Okay, well, let me work with them. Let me take a group of 5 or 6, give direct instruction and comprehension strategies, and let's practice it. Okay, so-and-so is still not responding. All right, let me target it to 1 or 2. Now let's see if they can respond to some direct instruction. Well, guess what? When your administration and your leaders are saying, okay, you have 6 weeks to run an intervention, that's not going to help. And if we jump too quickly to start identifying a language disorder, we've not given tier 1, 2, and 3 time to have an effect. Because I do think there is some underlying language disorders there. The problem I struggle with as a reading teacher and an interventionist is the time to drill down and see, is it an instructional problem or is it a language disorder? I would love some feedback on that.
I have no answers, but I wonder the same thing as well. Especially right now, we have no time.
And Jessica and Dijon, to answer with you, somebody put in that is it right there. When I first started pulling kids out 6, 7 years ago and working with small groups, they don't even know when they don't know. You hit it right there. I quickly made a little emoticon poster in my classroom. Know what you know and know what you don't know. And they just knew it was safe to say, I have no idea. And when they came to me and started asking those questions, I was like, whoa. And this child has like a C in class, and that's considered okay. But the language disorder, it's so intertwined and so hard to piece apart, because I'm not aware of a really good systematic targeted intervention protocol to follow on comprehension, because it's overarching.
If I could just say just a quick thing on that, because my son falls into this category. He has, he falls under the DLD and dyslexia, and I've learned so much now, especially from Tiffany Hogan. I highly recommend following Tiffany Hogan's work on this. I've learned so much. But a game changer, he's now in middle school. A game changer I'm seeing in this is that curriculum matters. Like his district had just embraced the ELA curriculum, and I can't tell you how much more he has to grasp on, because the core instruction now is so much better. And now with having the support of working still with the speech language pathologist, I'm seeing him make more gains than before, where it was piecemeal curriculum and teachers are all just creating their own activities and focusing more like what we've been saying here about like random, standards and, here, let me just do an anchor chart with a task and then go off. He struggled with that model. Now he's less stressed, he's participating, he's getting it. So took note of that too. So in my district, I now have just moved to the central office level, and I get to work with curriculum instruction. I'm actually a tech coach. So it's kind of my sneaky way into everybody right now is teaching these strategies using technology. But I'm going to be doing the same thing as trying to get the speech pathologists to talk about their language comprehension and the importance of it, so that general educators have better knowledge. Because I found with the dyslexia piece, we have I didn't learn anything about this when I was taking a teacher prep program. And I took a whole reading course and I took a special education course, and yet I knew nothing about any of this. So I think, all of that connects. So, there's not like we said, a silver bullet, but the more we can get people working together around stronger tier instruction, the more successful these kids are going to be.
So what about if we have any of you guys seen this? So I know we all know small groups. We pull for interventions, we data dig, and we group our kids, but we are always going in reverse. We're always pulling those students up, and it doesn't mean it's bad, and we need to do that. But for students with talking about, and Shannon, with your child, and I know I'm aware of that curriculum because it builds on content, he's just constantly being able to store that information to have conversations that would probably are just easier for him with the deficit in that. What about going forward with RTI? What if we think, hey, our kids are going to be working on, Sarah said, the fall of Rome, and we're going to be working on the X, Y, and Z. So for the next 2 weeks in my intervention, I'm going to be working on some things that they need to do, decoding skills, or some things that they have some deficits in, but I'm going to go forward. I'm going to go ahead and start giving them some vocabulary and background knowledge so that when we get to that official lesson, they're having an anchor. They're getting a little bit more support so we can have them involved more in conversations, or involved more in being able to look at the print and kind of understanding and decoding. Has anyone experienced that, where instead of going backwards in intervention or RTI, maybe you go forward a few weeks and give them something to, some information to hang their coat on type thing? Do most people kind of what we know of as differentiation and RTI and tier 1, 2, and 3 groups, we kind of go back?
There's a model, I haven't done a lot with it, but I know a couple of my friends are. I think it's called Vicki Gibson. It's and it has to do with there's like a pre-teach teacher led, but I haven't really done much with it.
We don't do that in our division. Our division, the assumption is if the child is in intervention, the interventionist's job is to work on those foundational skills that are inhibiting them from being able to access grade level text. So I see what you're saying, but most of our kids in intervention have word level reading difficulties. They're not confident readers who need this type of work.
And kids that, I worked with, the same thing. And you kind of, you want to help them to read, but even if it's not, let's say they're in tier 3 and they're getting 5 days of pull out in their intervention groups, what if we're throwing in the first 5 minutes of it, talking about, or just reading a passage, or talking about a few vocabulary words before we get into some decoding strategies? Or what if we take a few days out of the week? Just a thought process of, instead of just always falling back, falling forward almost, and letting them be able to and gain confidence even with their oral listening, and involved in classroom discussions, because normally those kids that are struggling like that, they're the ones that are the least involved. And I just really think with the language, any student that's struggling with language difficulties, that might really support them.
What I find interesting, a lot of intervention protocols really go at a very slow pace with kids. There's a letter this week or a letter combination that week. Last spring, last fall, I came around Dr. Ginsburg and Reading Simplified. And what I love about her methodologies and practices, it really is a continuum, and you're not meant to lock kids on this pace. It's meant to kind of go forward and back and ebb and flow. But with every cycle, with every lesson you're teaching the kids, you're getting to text. You're connecting to text, and you're talking about text. It's huge to not, as interventionists, I find a lot of people get very honed in on those word level strategies. And if you don't put it all together, missing the big piece of the puzzle.
This has been just great conversation. I love just being able to chat with other educators. Is there anyone else? I know we're kind of getting close to our time. I want to say people I know have Christmas trees to decorate, I've heard, and I'm hoping to get some Christmas shopping done today. But any other things like wrapping up about vocabulary or comprehension that you want to kind of just say, put it out there, or questions you want to ask to anybody? I love looking at the chat. You know, Nancy Bell's visualizing and verbalizing for language comprehension.
Elena, real quick, I want to, Laura posed a question, a sort of off topic question about how to have this sort of discussion beyond report card grades with parents in terms of student outcomes, which was a great question, because I'm definitely always intentional on being parent awareness focused. And so does anyone have any feedback about how do you have, so I'm going to read it verbatim. It says, it seems that the standards and student outcomes are part of the conversation that we were having. So what's the best way to share student outcomes and needs with parents? Most schools use report cards. Some include reading levels, others include standards-based skills outcomes. What is the best way to report? What are the problems with standards-based reporting, assuming Common Core? And I always say dig beneath the grades. What are those grades? Are subjective. It's based on, we all had those professors that we were like, don't take that one. Go see so-and-so because he's easier. It is sometimes based on that teacher's, difficulty of having that instructor. So dig beyond that. And sometimes it is about the skill. What skills are they developing, and how does that assessment accurately assess that skill, accurately assess that? That to me is the big part, because I've had teachers are trying to assess a skill, and I look at the test and I'm like, that's not actually what you did. You took points off for handwriting or took points off for spelling, but this is a comprehension test. So what does his comprehension say? How is he acquiring this information, and how is he delivering it back to you based on the type of assessment that you've given? So to that, Laura, I would just say we have to really look at how our students are being assessed, and if that aligns with the instruction. I mean, we can go on forever with that.
Well, and I think also just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's with the little ones, it's really tough because these kids have got A's and B's, and then I'm pulling them to listen to them read, and I'm like, they can't read. So the underlying factor for the little ones is that oral reading fluency is huge, and not getting 90th percentile. Our first graders reading about 60 words a minute by the end of the year. And then something interesting, because I'm back in tier 1. I hadn't been in tier 1 in a couple of years. And in addition to my report cards, I'm taking snapshots of my children's writing journals from September and now. And I'm not putting a grade on it, but I'm just sharing with parents, I want you to see this growth. There's got to be ways that we can dig deeper to those grades and find out, are they reading? Younger kids, it's oral reading fluency and read talk. Big kids, it's honestly those cold reads. I think not for a grade, but just to see, can they read and answer questions about text?
So, now my alter ego, I'm not sure what her name will be, with my Essence of Reading perfume. Ideally, I would love to see a report card that, look, if you're telling me a kindergartner is working on phonological awareness and has achieved some basic phoneme level skills and doing this, hallelujah. Like, I know I can send them, and they know their letter naming. I can send them to first grade, and those first grade teachers are going to go, I got it from here. So we did that a few years ago when I worked at a previous position, as we went to each grade level. We said, give me 3 things that you want them to come in doing, and you can go, I got it from here. And we created a document. And so a vertical alignment from pre-K up to 12th grade. And I was an elementary person, so focusing on elementary. And a lot of teachers took that and used that for parents. Now, I know it still didn't mimic our report cards, because in Louisiana, we still give, you have a 92, you have a 87, and that doesn't tell me anything about my child and what they're doing or what they're not doing. Even getting home weekly work, you sign it, you look through it, but still. And then thinking about the range of parents, about their education level. So we took that that vertical alignment, and some teachers then sent it home to parents to say, this is the 3 things. And it was just less daunting for a teacher, but less daunting for a parent when they say, what can I work on, or what do they need? And I do have to say, when I taught in New York, I loved our report cards. Now, we did it on a rubric. It was a 1, 2, 3, 4, but they broke it out. If it was their reading grade, they broke apart what it meant. And so you had sections that were they understanding the text, when read aloud, or were they able to read CVC words? And then you could rate your comments. And so it was really interesting that they took the most important things that student needed by the end of the year, and it was broken down into categories and then subcategories. So it kind of still relates back to standards that we know they have to do, but it's almost taking those standards and pinpointing the most important and having that conversation across your school, across your parish, across your district, really, what is the minimum? Because at this point, dear Lord, if we can take something off of educators' plates, we've said that for years, this would be the year that we could do that. But just having that conversation of what's the minimum that they need to leave me doing and to move on. And, the same thing with writing and everything. And I think all of that, then you can tie in the comprehension and the vocabulary and all these different areas from the National Reading Panel that are so important, and taking those as kind of like your basic, like how you're starting it out and having those conversations. And it might not go any higher than your grade level or your school level, but it's a great start on the conversations, and then giving to parents of here's what they're really doing and what they're lacking. Just some ideas.
And it's about how we measure success. So, it's school districts aren't the only ones that are letter grade focused. Our parents are letter grade focused. That's the measurement of success for them. They know if their kid comes home with an A or a B, then they're great. They know if their kid comes home with an F or a D, then there's a problem. But do our parents have enough knowledge to be aware of what sort of drove us to that final letter grade? So it's about, that's what we're here for, is to spread awareness, like holiday cheer. All right.
I was gonna say, Dejanay is gonna start getting a wrap on everything, 5 minutes. And
so
I don't want my monsters to walk through this house and give you guys a shock. So
I'm gonna turn it over to Maria, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone saw the link to the survey. I'm putting it in again. I so appreciate this conversation. Lots of wonderful feedback and conversation with this. You guys made this easy. This is what we wanted to do. We wanted to come and have some open dialogue. So a huge thank you to all of you for participating. And I told Maria that we were just going to show up today. We're going to wing it. We're just going to talk. We're just going to talk about some practical applications, because that's sort of what we do. We need to know, how do I take this knowledge, bring it back to my classroom? And I would be remiss if I left this setting without plugging Plain Talk, our Plain Talk for Literacy and Learning Institute by the Center for Developmental and Learning. The registration is open. We talked about that, about administrators having an awareness of sort of those decisions that need to be made. Send your administrators to this conference. We're going to have a wonderful leadership track that is going to be very intentional on how to apply this knowledge, how to gain the knowledge first and apply it to your building level, the decisions that are made. And in Louisiana, we are going to have an intensive with building level leaders in terms of how to be able to apply this information. First, we're going to give them the information and apply it to the decisions you have to make at the building level, including scheduling, because we know that's an issue. So Thank you guys. And Maria, there you have it.
I think I'm just going to close out. Pam, will you tell us about next week so we can be prepared? And
Sure.
thank you.
Well, sadly, chapter 5 is the slimmest chapter in teacher education, and isn't that a little bit telling? So, and scary. The Reading League Pennsylvania will be, of course, digging into the NRP chapter of teacher education, as well as the excellent article by Emily Biggs-Cantrout and her colleagues. Yep. But also, I think most of us on this call or this meeting today probably didn't learn the science. I'll speak for myself. I didn't learn the science of reading in college and any of my certifications. We know that higher ed bears some responsibility here in all of this. And so we do have universities across our country who are moving in the right direction. And we wanted to kind of bring them to the forefront and have them tell how they began that journey, how they continue that journey to embed the science of reading in all that they do. So we've invited 7 university representatives to be on a panel to share with you their journey, but also some of the barriers that they've had to overcome. So we hope that it'll be a rich conversation like everyone has been. Dejanay and Elena, you rocked it. It was an amazing conversation today. And I agree with them. Definitely go to Plain Talk. It's an amazing conference. And I did put in the chat too, in regard to the topic today, we were very fortunate at the Reading League Pennsylvania to recently do a book study with Nancy Hennessy and some amazing chapter leads on the blueprint for reading comprehension, how to help students make meaning from text. It is an absolutely amazing book, grounded in the evidence, aligned to Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, but filled with application. And so I would really encourage you to check that book out. And our Padlet has a lot of resources on it as well. And that's that.
Thank you very much. That's going to be a really unique and cool way to wrap up all of these sessions we've had. I cannot wait to hear what all the university panelists have to say about what's happening out there. We need a lot more of it, but what an important start. Well, thank you, Reading League Louisiana. Bright spot in my morning and in our learning. You are really engaging moderators, and the humor part, the essence of comprehension. I think we all smell it today. So
We
thank
do.
you very much.
Sometimes it doesn't talk too great on certain people, but
Whatever.
chemistry with bodies.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, I'm gonna sign this off and I'll get this downloaded and then uploaded to Facebook on our group. And if anyone has any further pieces that they want to ask, we can always continue the conversation on the Facebook group. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Bye.